Ooh, ooh, you're trapped, dazed, lost in a world without time where colors collide in kaleidoscopic patterns. That doesn't have anything to do with today's show, which is The Nose. We're going to talk about Mrs. Davis, which is about AI. Mrs. Davis is the name for sort of an overarching AI that kind of runs everything. And then there's a nun. This makes total sense, I promise. There's a nun who's going to take Mrs. Davis down. We'll explain it on the other side of the news. We'll also talk about the writers' strike. You know what the writers are asking for in their minimum bargaining agreement, among other things? A ban on AI writing scripts. It all ties together. And is the word ladies and ladies and gentlemen, is that a microaggression? We may have time to talk about that too.
This morning from the strangest dream. I was in the biggest army the world has ever seen. We were marching as one on the road to the Holy Grail.
That is actually the RogerEbert.com review of Mrs. Davis, our first topic today, set to music. I think that's a new thing. They're probably using AI. Which would be ironic, and none of that's true anyway. But we are going to talk today about Mrs. Davis. It's on Peacock right now. It is a co-project of Tara Fernandez and Damon Lindelof. You know the latter from things like Lost and... I don't know. Maybe it's because of the third topic of the show today, but I feel like I sound a little bit like Jerry Lewis. You know him from shows like Lost, from Lost, and The Leftovers, and Watchmen. But anyway, so we've watched 5 or 6 episodes of that. And then in the second segment, we'll talk about the writers' strike. Maybe there isn't going to be any Peacock anymore. Maybe actually Peacock will be there because it's just an enormous warehouse full of old NBC material. But meanwhile, writers from the WGA are taking their future into their hands and fighting back against what they see as fairly oppressive contractual working conditions. We'll explain more about that, what its overall implications are. If we have time, are terms like ladies and gentlemen microaggressions? Well, they may be. So, but not when Jerry Lewis goes, lady! I think that's still okay. I'm not 100% sure, but we'll find out. And we'll find out from our wonderful panel today. Taneisha Duggan, Associate Professor at Octopus Theatricals. Rich Hollant, Principal at CoLab, Founder at the Free Center, and Commissioner on Cultural Affairs for the City of Hartford. Lindsay Lee Wallace writes about culture, healthcare, and health equity, and other stuff, too. Other stuff, too, is, I think, part of the log line for Episode 3 of Mrs. Davis. But let's hear a little bit of Episode 2 before we get going. You're going to hear... Betty Gilpin, who plays Simone/Lizzie, the nun who has undertaken on behalf of all humankind to bring down AI. AI exists in the form of this one super algorithm known in America as Mrs. Davis and known as other things in other countries. And she'll be talking to a guy whose name I can't really pronounce, but he plays JQ, one of the leaders of kind of an underground, literally underground resistance against Mrs. Davis. Here we go.
2 weeks ago, the algorithm pinged every user in Nevada, California, and New Mexico. It pinged them a photo of you. It's been years since the algorithm did a wide blast to locate a non-user. It only does it when some poor drongo is about to be chosen one.
Chosen one?
Yeah. The Big D force feeds hero's journey to its network. You know, you're special. You're the one. Algorithms love cliches. And there's no cliche bigger than the quest for the Holy Grail. The most overused MacGuffin ever. Not to mention pretend.
But if the Grail's not real, why send me after it?
Somewhere out there known as a massive server farm. But no algorithm with this power and reach can operate at this level without people to maintain it. Grail quests are how it finds those people. This server farm is the mothership, none. If we can find it, we can shut it down. If we can't, well, then it's just a matter of time before every person on Earth does whatever it asks them to.
One of the things I like about that character is he addresses Betty Gilpin, who is Sister Simone, as none. that is the only name he apparently knows for her. So we have a lot to talk about. I should say that the big star of the series is, in fact, Betty Gilpin. You might have loved her on Glow and some other stuff. Got to represent the 860 here. She's from Northwestern Connecticut. Her father, Jack, has been on this show, and I've done stuff with him. He's an actor as well, very renowned actor. Is still on the Gilded Age, I think, assuming the writer's strike doesn't take that out. The other two major stars are Jake McDorman. Oh, by the way, Betty Gilmore also went to school. Betty Gilpin went to school very near here in Windsor, Connecticut at Loomis Chaffee. Anyway, Jake McDorman is Wiley, who is her childhood love, the childhood love of Lizzie/Sister Simone, and also apparently have something to do with the self-same resistance. And Andy McQueen as Jay, although within the reality of the series, he is Jesus. I mean, he's like really Jesus. But he's like make-out Jesus. He will like make out with you. And if you become a nun, he might do more. That's all I'm prepared to say at this time. So, as I say, this is an 8-episode series. We're anywhere from 4, 5, 6 episodes. And the 6th episode dropped last night. I tried to watch it and make it all the way through. But so Lindsay Lee Wallace, make me stop talking and start talking about Mrs. Davis. I don't know. I mean, begin wherever you want to, because this is a very kind of amorphous project, as Lindelof jams tend to be.
Well, I'm shocked by the revelation that Betty Gilpin is a nepotism baby, but she is definitely the saving grace of the show. So it's okay to me. And I was really trying to do some kind of Episcopalian make out Jesus portmanteau there, and I couldn't make it happen. So I'll just go with I was delighted by the wild use of Christianity.
Yeah, Episcopalians don't make out with Jesus; they have cocktails with him. Anyway, continue.
Yes, definitely. So I, as somebody with no religious background who found myself suddenly immersed in Episcopalianism, this show really captured what that was like for me, just in terms of the imagery being so strange and kind of arresting, which I think was part of our conversation in the email thread leading up to this about how the main selling point of the show was sort of just that it's like really something to look at. The colors are very vibrant. The set pieces are kind of incredible. In terms of like the plotline, I sort of felt like it was just kind of a bunch of, what if AI, what if a conspiracy? And in some instances, that kind of thing falls apart for me. In this instance, I felt like everyone's performances and the arresting visual kind of just held it together, even if it didn't say much. It was just like a sparkly collage of timely topics and symbols, and I enjoyed it. Yeah,
and there's also a sense in which they're letting their fondness for other kinds of IP show. I mean, I really do feel there's a bunch of black-clad Germans at the beginning of the series who they just are the guys from The Big Lebowski. I don't know how they aren't. And there is a kind of Wes Anderson homage going on in the Resistance. So Taneisha Duggan, I don't know, maybe either build on what Lindsay Lee Wallace said or tear it down, or you do you about Mrs. Davis.
I'll do me. I actually am going to piggyback or jetpack off of something you just said, Colin, which is that there are a lot of references that I feel are being made. Like I feel like I'm seeing Monty Python. I feel like I'm seeing Matrix and Snowpiercer. I feel like all, packaged around this kind of absurd comedy, which feels very Monty Python-ish to me as well. I mean, I think that to me is that and Betty Gilpin feels to me like the saving grace of the project. It's sort of like the Easter eggs of your cultural context that you can find along the way, the Easter eggs of the sort of social themes that are gnawing at you today that you can connect with, and Betty Gilpin, who seems through her storytelling pull it all together into something that's remotely cohesive. If you're one who doesn't need a narrative and is looking for like what's happening around the corner, it's a vibe. But I am like a sucker for like relationship stories, and I'm still hoping, the central relationship, which is Lizzie.
Well, it's a throuple. It's kind of a throuple.
It is. You're right. I
They're
can't
leaving room for
lie.
Jesus.
But I would much rather be in a throuple, a polygamous story with Jesus, than some of the zany, antics that seem to be happening along the way.
I think, by the way, you just said something perfect about this, which is it is kind of about what's around the corner. What's the next thing that's going to happen? It isn't about really from beginning. It's not like the Iliad or something. It's really about like the next thing that's going to happen. I think that is perfectly expressed. All right, Mr. Hollant, you have the floor now, and you may do with it as you please.
Very cool. I'm about to start a network called ADHD TV because I think that this.
Good luck getting writers.
Well, yeah, I don't think you need writers for ADHD TV.
Then it's perfect.
Throwing squirrels in the room. So this was fun to look at. So let's start with what really worked about it, because that's what they told me to do in high school. It was really, really fun to look at. It was all these colors and all this sparkliness, and it was, I think we were referring to in Sleeper, there was this machine called the Orgasmatron that just put everybody into this kind of happy numb space. And this does a really good job of that. I enjoyed looking at it. I didn't work too hard to follow what was going on. As soon as they started doing this thing in this series where they would take a thread for about 5-6 minutes or so, and then just kind of drop it and move on to something else. After about 2-3 episodes of that, I was okay with that. I was okay with television as haiku. It kind of worked for me in a lot of ways. The disappointing part was there's some relationships that really want to get going here. I got as far as episode 4, and there's this sort of weird triangle that might happen with Jesus and who I didn't realize was actually Jesus. I thought it was just like, a manner of speaking. Oh, Jesus. But no, apparently it is. And an old flame that the main character had. And I'm just wondering really how they come together in a kind of beautiful way. But I don't know.
I mean, she's seeing two guys. It's not like they're going to do some Ford Maddox Ford thing where the three of them are not going to get together, I don't think. Right?
I don't know. Why not? I mean,
it could be around the corner. That could be.
Jesus was all about loving everybody. So.
That's what it's
and
about.
There are religious sects that embrace that. So, like SEC.
Yes, we intuited your spelling. Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's interesting too, because I think what several of you, maybe all of you, are suggesting too is, well, like what Taneisha says, whatever you bring to the table, you get to kind of, I don't know, pick up the pieces on the table that are kind of meaningful to you. So yeah, if you've never seen Monty Python, you're not going to think about that. I've been watching this with someone who was brought up Catholic. And in Catholicism, the notion that nuns marry Jesus is a very explicit thing. They are the brides of Christ. That is what is happening. And it's not really treated as some kind of allegory. They are marrying Jesus. So I've never seen anything before that said, well, like if you really played that out, what would that be like? But I mean, they are kind of doing that in a way that is either delightful or uncomfortable making, but Lindsay, I think another thing that Rich is sort of getting at too is you really would like there to be some stakes, maybe some real stakes, and I mean, I will sort of spoil a little something, but I won't explain anything about it. At a certain point, a character's head actually explodes. Like the person's head explodes. Not like a little bit either. It like really explodes. And I just it just doesn't really, that should really upset me. But Lindsay, I feel like whatever level of reality has been created here doesn't really allow for us to make huge investments in outcomes or characters.
I think that that's a fair point. And the head explosion, I actually jumped and audibly went, oh my God, which was, I guess, exactly what they were hoping to elicit from me. And, I'm sorry to make out Jesus for my blasphemy. But I think that you're right that it's not like a story forward type of show where you're invested in the relationship dynamics between the characters so much as it is like, how is this bizarre plot going to unspool itself? And definitely, generally my favorite kinds of stories are the ones that make me invested in the relationships between the people. But every now and then, sort of like the conversation that we've had in the past about media as bombs, B-O-M-B versus balm, B-A-L-M. This kind of is like, it was a balm in a way by just being absurd, not requiring a lot of emotional investment, and just sort of being something bonkers to watch and wait to find out what was going to happen. But I definitely get how that wouldn't be your cup of tea if you were looking for something where the relationships were going to be fleshed out and fully explored.
Right. The Catholic person that I'm watching this with is very squirmy about about that particular relationship. It was like maybe a little bit too fine a point on it. But, Taneisha, I think we should talk a little bit more about the acting here. I mean, Betty Gilpin, I think we can all agree, is acting her ass off here. And there's a way in which I think Lindelof, and I'll blame Lindelof for anything I think is wrong with this, because I think Tara Fernandez may have even brought him a very different kind of project. But I think he asks his leading actors to do a lot. I mean, Carrie Coon had a lot of work to do in The Leftovers. And ultimately, her job is to take something that seems, I think, to all four of us, a little on the cartoonish side and make it real and make it have some real flesh and some real pain. And I think the person who's doing that besides her, he's a much smaller role, but Ben Chaplin plays this character named Arthur Schrodinger, who has a cat, but isn't that Schrodinger? But when Chaplin's on the screen, I'm thinking, oh yeah, you can sort of believe his part of it, kind of. Except, well, anyway, but you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and for me, there's a part of me that's like, we're talking about these relationships that are like not really fulfilling, and I think ultimately that's textual, not I think it's on purpose, and because Betty's acting is so strong, we're sort of like rooting for this relationship between Lizzie and Wiley, or Lizzie and Jesus, that I don't even know if it's actually on the page. And to that point, there's a part of me that wonders, like, if the writers, as we get through the season, if the writers are starting to be self-aware of the sort of lack of threads, the head exploding part felt meta to me, right? Like, it felt as much like I've been on this ride with you and I don't really know where I'm going and my head's about to explode.
Yes.
And so the writer giving us this like moment to sort of, I don't know, erase part of what's happened prior, there feels to me like there's a lot of self-awareness in the work as we get deeper into the season, that I'm curious if the acting can continue to sort of hide for us, as it did sort of early on when we're still sort of like pulling as you expect when you start a series. You're like, okay, I'm putting it together, or this is brand new to me. I have no idea who these people are or why they're here. I'm going to learn. And then I think once you get past episode 4, you're like, okay, where are we? Are we just here? Oh, we're just here, and we're going to be here and surprise. It's like a fun house in a lot of ways.
Right. So, Rich, one thing that we wound up emailing a lot about this week, and there's no way we're getting through the second segment without talking quite a bit about it, is AI. But AI is, the elevator pitch here is a nun fights a super AI. I mean, that's, the log line, sort of, for this series. But there's a way in which Mrs. Davis maybe isn't, I don't know. She's certainly not a Bond villain AI. She's kind of just makes everything too easy for everybody, right? But maybe that's a pretty good meta, to use Taneisha's term, comment too. That's the real problem with AI. It seems to make things easy.
That's exactly the problem with AI, and I think that that there's a piece about this that feels like it's the commentaries about AI are really made from the perspectives of the characters from Hogan's Heroes. This is all about the French Resistance in a lot of ways. The writers specifically in this have given us a taste of what writing will be like in the AI universe. Fractured and without any real depth in relationship, It's just the gloss of relationship. And that actually works really, really well for me in this narrative thus far. The only character that I feel is real, and I suspect that I'm going to get disappointed by the 8th season to find out that she's not real, is none. Every time we explore a character, it turns into this like little shorthand of a character, and it's done to me with deliberate intention. The look of the film has that kind of look of AI. I've been looking at images lately, and I'm like, there's something a little wrong about this, and I can't put my finger on what it is. And I look a little closer and a little closer, and that's what it is. It's not real. And this entire series is developed with in a way that feels like a bunch of input has been put in, that this is what a car looks like, this is what a headset looks like, and it's played back to us in that kind of data loaded way. That aspect of it is kind of really smart. Just wish that the writing helped us recognize the contrasts between what's real and what's not real in a better way. I wish they'd be more deliberate about that.
So we're about to talk about writing. I do. Lindsay or Taneisha, is your head about to explode with something you need to say? If so, I mean, we have time and room.
This is what I'll say. This is probably a repeat of an earlier point, but as we're like talking more about this project, I can't quite tell if what we're saying is actually the intent of our takeaway for this, or if we are putting it on top of this thing that we've watched, and then I'm like, well, is that the brilliance of it? Because, Siri, AI, these things have a kind of soft but insidious hand. And is that like intentional? And if that's intentional, then that's quite remarkable. But I don't quite believe that it's intentional. And maybe, and again, round and round and round she goes. Maybe that is in fact the point that they're trying to make. But I'm not quite sure it's as intentionally brilliant as our conversation has drawn it to be.
Well, I have Harold Bloom in the studio sitting right here, and he is able to rule on questions of ways in which creators and consumers interact with prose and text. So I'll get a ruling from him. Lindsay, yeah, I heard you piping up.
Oh, just I think that to the point of, if it is the goal, because I agree, Taneisha, that it's not even clear, but if it is the goal to depict something that seems as though it could have been created by AI, then part of the conversation that always comes up with AI is whether it has, the ability to capture humanity, and whether it has the ability to capture that, whatever the spark is that makes a story feel like it belongs in its context and relates to our emotions. And if that's what's happening here, then it's sort of, like you're saying, an experiment in meaning making. Can we make something out of this collection of sparkly nonsense that feels to us like a cohesive story? And if we can do that when we watch it, then does it even matter if it didn't give us that on its own? Which is kind of insidious.
Yeah. But it's a really interesting question too. Okay, we'll wrap here. I just do want to say one thing here, which I have kind of a problem with Lindelof generally. When I first started watching Lost, like a lot of people, I was kind of intrigued, for a season or two. And then it struck me that his technique as a writer is when he started to get confused by his own work. He would do that kind of Bugs Bunny Looney Tune things where you go and you paint a wall, you paint a door on the side of the wall, and then Bugs Bunny, opens the door that he just painted because it now works, and he walks into a whole new realm, and there's other people there, whatever, And I think maybe this is a way to solve that problem, because that's basically, this is kind of a Bugs Bunny cartoon. It's like a really good, incredibly expensive live action Bugs Bunny cartoon. But to everybody's point who's spoken the last, maybe we're watching a Bugs Bunny cartoon and just trying to be real smart about it, which there's nothing wrong with that. It's not going to hurt us. All right. We'll take a little break. We'll come back. We'll talk about the writer's strike. we are back. We are back with Taneisha Duggan, Rich Hollant, Lindsay Lee Wallace, and we are about to talk about the writer's strike. Just to set the stage, I believe it's Monday night at midnight, the official end of talks. The reality is that the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, walked away from those talks. Typically, they run out the clock, but they walked away hours before that because there was no resolution in sight. The two sides apparently are pretty dramatically far apart. So this is going to affect, and probably has already affected at first, shows in which the writing is turned in on the same day that it is used. That would be things like the Jimmy Kimmel Show, or in some cases Saturday Night Live, stuff like that. All those kinds of shows, they're going to be shut down if they're not already. John Oliver probably too. All those kinds of things. And then sort of one by one, other things will be affected by it. We can talk a little bit as we go along if we want to about how and why that will happen. But we are seeing the early stages of it. And I think it's also kind of a moral referendum on the way entertainment is kind of bought and sold and processed and distributed these days, and who the big players are. So with that in mind, I don't know, Rich, do you want to get us going? I know you've got a lot of thoughts about this. Is there a particular direction you want to get going in the first place?
Well, I think that my thoughts about this are two. My thoughts about this are about the ideas of unions in general. My thoughts are also in particular about that sticky point around AI to complete the conversation, to tie to the conversation that we were just having. The idea that we are at a place where I think as a society we tend to have internalized this idea that the invention of the airplane is the invention of the plane crash, and get really anxious about when something new comes to play. And we run through, as a society, the same sort of routine of concern. And that concern ends up leading us to some kind of doomsday scenario at all times. And there is a doomsday scenario that's been played out around all sort of tech advancements, and we've yet to see it deliver that. We ultimately end up seeing that jobs just get redefined and people get reassigned, and that society keeps plugging along the way it always has, which is on the backs of the marginalized. So there isn't a whole lot that I'm seeing right now that AI is going to challenge, other than the writers that are on the margins. I don't think that there's the AI part of this conversation is a legitimate concern to the folks who are working for John Oliver, for example.
Probably not. Although we should say that this is part of the conversation. I mean, there are a lot of moving pieces in this labor dispute. It's not just about one thing. It's not just about compensation, although that's in there. The structure of what are called residuals have become important. The length of seasons has become important. For example, everybody working on Mrs. Davis is working on an 8-episode thing. When that's done, frequently they're not even allowed on the set, and they're not allowed to have continued employment. And you get your work done, you're done. That's very different from the days of 22-episode seasons, where it was basically something close to a year-round job. That's something else that needs to be addressed. But yeah, AI is right in there. It's right there in the contract negotiations. WGA is saying that under no circumstances can an AI replace a writer's job. A job that was going to be done by a writer cannot be done by AI. They want that in what's called the minimum basic agreement, the MBA contract. So yeah, it's something they're worried about. And the AMPTP, which is the wealthy overlord organization, has said they countered by offering annual meetings to discuss advancements in technology, which seems like something Mrs. Davis would suggest. Why don't we just have a meeting to talk about technology instead of banning me? Anyway, Taneisha, where are your thoughts right now?
So many things, so many things. One, I'm gonna sort of Papulian thread it and kind of pull in Ed Sheeran a little bit, and our transition music, in that there's a little bit of figuring out who owns what when. And I think the sort of AI residual sort of structural question is that when the last negotiation went through and they sort of were passive about new media, that opened up the door to the Peacocks and the additional streaming threads that were considered new media, even though they were really, production houses and studios, right? That they were essentially the same old thing, but operating in this sort of, Wild West. And so, yes, Rich, I'm with you that yes, in some ways the to use your metaphor, the introduction of the plane also introduced the idea of the plane crash. The guild was burned in negotiations 3 years ago when they were sort of lax and open to emergent new future technologies and platforms. And it cut to the ways in which the writers work, and writing as a profession, and writing as a profession that is built on apprenticeship and being in the room and being on location and being on set, that being able to watch the sausage get made is how you are able to make better sausage, right? And Colin, you said in your intro that this was very much about the way in which entertainment works, but I actually think because this is a union conversation, it is a reflection of our general work life, and the conversations, the larger, broader conversation is about the worker versus the overseer, which is essentially an American conversation that has been at the center of our lives, not just our work lives, but our lives since it started. This may be the way in which human beings organize themselves across humanity, but it is the thing that we are talking about today. Who gets to decide how we live? And work is 80% of our life. And if capitalism and late stage capitalism is the definer of our work life, we're all in a bit of trouble. So how do we maintain a system that encourages collaboration and collectivism, which is what the creative arts do when done right? And the AI is just, a version of building this thing in which you don't need the collective, in which you can say, here's actually the framework of the story. We've built it. We're not artists, but we've built it and we think it will do a thing. Now we'd love you to just go into a room and flesh it out, right? That's, I think, the artistic sense that they're fighting for, but the structural, how do we make this thing together in a way that pays people differently than Uber, right? Differently than a gig economy.
Right. And that is a problem. I think there are actually even day rates for comedy writers these days that have come up. I mean, this is, like just total work for hire kind of stuff, and ways to sort of break the old format of the way that you brought something to fruition. You'll hear in the conversations a lot about, for example, mini rooms. As I understand this is, you maybe pre-production, you get a minimum number of writers together and have them kind of break out stories and stuff like that. And then you just chase them all away. They're not part of this. They've done their little part. So, yeah. And so, Lindsay, I think another thing that we sort of need to acknowledge is that the landscape has changed. The players have changed. Even the last big strike was 07, 08. It's a real different world now. And some of the people, some of the entities with whom one deals are entities like Apple. Apple probably can stand a writer's strike for quite some time because Apple has other things that it does, and so does Amazon. I mean, so to a certain degree, and I would throw Disney Plus in there. Oh, really? A writer's strike? What will we ever do here at Disney Plus? Well, we can, first of all, assassinate Ron DeSantis, and then we'll think of something else. But I mean, there are sort of big companies here that. I mean, Netflix is going to need some scripts pretty soon, but there are other companies that don't, right? And they just have, I guess what I'm really suggesting is they have a different corporate culture too. I don't know what a writer means to Apple.
Yeah, I mean, I know that this also came up when IATSE, which is the union that represents a lot of the other people who work in film and TV, had their strike vote a couple of years ago, is that when streaming services were introduced, there were like leniencies built into the contracts to help them get off the ground, as though these like massive organizations were like burgeoning startups full of like bright-eyed people or something. But and now those leniencies are being used against people continuously, as though streaming services are not the main way that people consume entertainment today, and as though they're not, continually reporting profits, even though there are some bumps in the road and they're, people are getting more fed up with them. But I think that you're right that Taneisha, you're right that it's a matter of like, this is a conversation about how we want work to be. And when it comes to entertainment, I think that there's often this compulsion to separate out these jobs as though, because they're artistic jobs, they're both, kind of too trivial to be worth the same level of attention or labor rights than, other kinds of jobs, but also they're dream jobs. And so you should be willing to put up with anything and suffer in any way to have them. And in reality, the implications for the way that people are treated on film and TV sets and in writers' rooms also affect the way that everyone else is treated at work, and maybe in a more high profile way, because this is a very visible labor action, which we don't necessarily get that often. So I think that it's true that, the players have changed and AI is part of the conversation now, as we've discussed, but it feels strange to me how much of it seems to be like an echo of the conversations that were happening even when the last writer's strike occurred. Not that I was terribly sentient paying attention to it back then, but reading the people's comparisons has been kind of fascinating in terms of, the progress that we have or haven't made for both, specifically WGA, but also just for labor rights in general.
Yeah. And actually, the last writer's strike, some people will tell you the last writer's strike made reality television a much bigger thing, and that maybe it made The Apprentice what it was, and therefore made America what it was starting in 2017. So, be careful, I guess, what you do in these situations.
You know who the president will be?
Yeah, I think that means maybe Betty Gilpin will be the next president, or Mrs. Davis. I don't know, one or the other.
I think that's my overall point, isn't it, Colin? That it gets back to that thing. The invention of the airplane is the invention of the plane crash. That strike, that new thing that we're throwing into the works. If we have the idea that we can predict the outcome of that, as folks who are pro writers and pro creative, and believe that being pro writers and pro creative is somehow more elevated than being pro capitalism, I think that we're being a little delusional. We're buying the narrative that there is a right answer here. There isn't a right answer. There is an outcome, and the strike creates an outcome, and that outcome is always unpredictable. I'm going to tell you, recently I was walking down the streets where Marie Antoinette was using the people's money to buy wigs and dresses and gloating about it all, conspicuously doing what everybody's always done, who were in that position, and she lost her head for it. It didn't stop capitalism; it stopped Marie Antoinette. And the machine's going to carry on. I love this idea of writers sitting in a room, working together, and how that is what we've known thus far. Maybe we could open ourselves up to knowing something different. Maybe we could open ourselves up to putting a different kind of content out there that has meaning and isn't just moments that move through that get away from us.
So the one thing, go ahead. Somebody said,
something that Lindsay said that I think I want to just sort of re-elevate, which is the idea that if you work in culture, you have a dream job, and therefore you should be happy for the opportunity to do so, right? And I actually want to imagine that everybody gets to do a dream job, because we are species on this planet who could do nothing, right? Beyond feed yourself and have a place to be sheltered in. None of this is required for living, right? So like, you often hear me say this when I'm on the show, culture isn't just about like what we do to pass the time. It's also a mirror of what we do to pass the time. So the ways in which we, within the unions, whether it's WGA or AEA or SAG or the Producers Guild and on and on and on, dream up how we spend our time, that we spend our time with dignity, that we spend our time with purpose, that we spend our time, because the current system is capitalism, being able to attain the things through this system within monetarily, like that is the dream that we are trying to embody and investigate and talk about, not just through this very specific engagement with the unions and the owners versus the workers, but in the story of a Mrs. Davis, right? The chaos and the absurdism of that story allows us to just go, oh, it's just chaotic and absurd, and I'm going to allow that to be what it is, as opposed to relational and connected, and that's the world in which I want to live in. I reject a little bit of the plane crash analogy, Rich, because I think it steps into a reality that has been created over time, not a reality that must be moving forward.
All right, Lindsay, you have the last word here.
Just I would agree, Taneisha, and I think that yes, Rich, it's true that the machine continued to grind on over Marie Antoinette's headless body, but sort of in your own words, I don't think it's true that means the machine is inevitable and that we just have to wait and see what's going to come of it. I think that even if it were true that AI could eventually be trained to create stories that are just as empathetic and compassionate and meaningful as what people can do, it just comes back to the question of, okay, but are we building a society for AI to thrive in, or are we building a society for people to thrive in? Is there a point to erasing the kinds of work that people find rewarding to do and making it so that only jobs that exist are the ones that the people who moderate AI and get PTSD from reviewing tons of traumatizing content in order to remove it from AI's base of knowledge, are those the only jobs we want to exist? I don't think that is a world where we're opening ourselves up to a new kind of content. And I don't think that, unfortunately, under capitalism, there's a different direction that it can go in that will be creative and generative, even if there are people who benefit and even if the consequences take longer to reach the most privileged people. Ultimately, it's the same as it was when people were, trying to use AI to create beautiful portraits of themselves instead of artists. That's who it's going to come for first, is people whose work they find rewarding and people whose work we already considered undervalued. But it can, recreate everyone's job to be worse and more traumatizing and less well paid. And that doesn't feel like a worthwhile endeavor for humanity to embark on, when we could instead be trying to create a society that is built for humans and not machines.
All right, that's bug for whatever. That was better writing that you just did right there in your head than is in a lot of things that we talk about on this series. So that was really great. Thank you. So we're gonna take a little break right now. We're gonna come back. We're gonna do some stuff. We're gonna make some recommendations and things like that. All right, we didn't get to the ladies and gentlemen topic, so you're just on your own, blundering blindly through a sea of etiquette or something. Till next week. Maybe we'll do it next week. Got to thank Mr. Dylan Reyes. He's in the booth right now as a technical producer today. Always great to have him here. I believe he's going off on another one of his adventures pretty soon, and I will miss his input. And we might get his input, actually. And Jonathan McPants is the producer of The Nose pretty much all the time, and he is the producer today. We are going to make some recommendations right now with our wonderful panel. And Taneisha Duggan, why don't you lead those recommendations or endorsements off?
I love how whenever these start, you'll call my name and my brain immediately goes blank on what I was going to endorse. But then it came rushing back. Okay, guys, so it's springtime and Taneisha talks about the same thing for a couple of weeks until it gets hot and then she moves on. We're still in gardening phase in my world. And so I'm going to recommend, this is also connected to sort of non-union work, so sorry. Garden Answer It's a show on YouTube. It's a woman named Laura based in this sort of northeastern corner of Oregon. And she has an incredible garden. I have no idea what this woman does for a living, but she has acres of land and this beautiful home and these lovely children. And she like plants all day. But she's got great tips. So if you're into the gardening, she's your girl. Garden Answer on YouTube, regular spelling. And then I'm also going to endorse Gentle Bull Shop, which is a vintage store on Pratt Street. This may be old news because she's been open since the end of the last quarter, so end of 2023. But it's a fantastic, kind of subversive but fun store. If you're a cool mom or a bad mom or a I don't know.
How about a bad nun?
Or a bad nun, this is the shop for you. So Gentle Bull Shop on Pratt Street in Hartford. Check it out.
All right. Lindsay, what have you got for us?
So my first is the book An Ordinary Age by Rainford Stauffer, which goes to our conversations about labor and what it has to look like. It's like a really interesting journalistic exploration of the way that we think about work and like hustle culture and how it negatively affects us, and when it's okay to actually have achieved something not by an incredibly young age, but by an ordinary age. And my second recommendation is also a book. It's The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. When you want to just read something that is, I'm only halfway through it right now. So, but I feel good about this recommendation because everyone loves it. So it's about a world constantly plagued by earthquakes that experiences repeated apocalypses. And there are people who have powers to control the earth, but they're subjugated by these other people who are afraid of them. And it's just like really incredibly fleshed out and beautiful and cool. So yeah.
All right.
Also gives you some stuff to think about pertaining to labor, but in a more science fiction fantasy way.
All right. So 2 books. And so Rich, what are you going to talk about?
I got 2. One of them is a play that's right now at TheaterWorks Hartford. It's called The Rembrandt. It's a lovely story, and in a lot of ways, it's crafted not unlike this Mrs. Davis thing with these vignettes and transitions that happen sort of unexpectedly in an almost sort of magical realism way. But it pulls it off. The stories are full of heart and full of relationship. And it's part of TheaterWorks' apparently new approach to including technology and innovation and future thinking in how they present stories. Very cool. It's called The Rembrandt. It's on until May 14th. The other thing is a really lovely and humbly written book. It's not trying to be poetic. It's not trying to be like, here's all the fancy words and beautiful imageries that I could paint, but it tells a story, honestly, that's moving. It's by Barbara McClane, McClane, and it's called Blessed, Not Bitter. It's the very simple story of a very complicated ordeal that has been her life to her kind of lovely deliverance. Worth a read.
All right, so we're going to end here with a quick reflection, or a musical reflection on somebody that Rich knew very, very well, better than I did. But although I did know Peter Good fairly well, he was a wonderful, sweet. I don't think any of us will meet a sweeter person than Peter Good, but he was also an amazing designer and an amazing visionary about the visual world. And he's maybe disproportionately famous for having designed the Whalers logo, and which is an amazing logo. And long after the team is gone, people still cherish it. It uses negative space to create an H, stuff like that. So I don't know, rather than try to say stuff about Peter, and Rich would have so much more to say, we thought we would just end with a certain song to remember him with. So here's Jill Sobule, our very good friend.
What can we do? You love me and I loved you. It was a good life. It was a good life. It was a good life. It was a good